Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, that is right, my friends. You have tuned in to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. We were out a couple of days over the past, Friday and Monday, I guess, at an AAU basketball tournament with my daughter. They did reasonably well, finishing 4-2. Should have won one of those games. And if we played to our capabilities, we probably could have won all. But we didn't, 4-2, but it was a good time in Cincinnati. And it is good to be back here. My friends, I want to talk today about election integrity. I want to talk today about some evidence that has been mounting. Article here at justthenews.com talking about evidence of non-citizens reaching the voter rolls, reaching the polling locations. We're told that this never happens. We're told that this is something that is completely just like finding a unicorn. But the more investigations that, the longer these things go on, the more that we learn that that's simply not the case. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the Save America Act. I want to talk about something Indiana Senator Jim Banks has recommended or has introduced in the U.S. Senate. I want to talk about Trump's speech coming up on Thursday, which we'll talk about the details of that as well. That's where we're headed today, my friends. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in. Thoughts, questions, feedback, adoration, and praise will all be accepted at the email, todd@toddhuffshow.com. As I grab something off the computer here. Friends, are you tired of spending your hard-earned money at businesses that turn around and support leftist causes? Well, that's exactly why we created Freedom Marketplace. It's a free, searchable directory of businesses that share your conservative values. Businesses that have vowed not to support leftist candidates, leftist causes. There is no login required. There are no strings attached. Just good, patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction you are. Check it out today, freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. By the way, if you're a business who wants to list your business on Freedom Marketplace, you can do that or find out more information about that on the website as well. Liberty and business for all, my friends. So I told you off the top here, wanted to look at this article from justthenews.com. Headline here: evidence mounts of non-citizens reaching voter rolls, casting ballots as DOJ speeds crackdown. Now, you'll know that ever since 2020, President Trump and Republicans have been talking about election integrity. And that's actually something that Trump is going to talk about Thursday night in a nationwide address, according to reports, which I'm going to reference another article here that we're not going to dig into just yet. But this is at newsmax.com. Report: Trump's speech to spill 20 election-meddling intel. So, in other words, his speech on Thursday night is reportedly going to be about intelligence, about evidence of election meddling in the 2020 election, which all ties back to this push to get the Save America Act passed through the U.S. Senate. Trump has increased this pressure to as high as he possibly can. I mean, we're looking right now what elections are. This is July 14th, so August, September, October, November. We're about 4 months away, a little bit less than that actually, from the 2026 midterm elections. Trump is, of course, trying to secure. Trump has done a lot of things to help secure Republican victories in the midterm elections. Now, you may have Also seen, I don't have this pulled up, but in saying that, I just remember seeing over the weekend that there was a recent poll showing that Republicans' chances of winning the U.S. House, keeping control of the U.S. House, had actually increased. So it appears right now, it's still a toss-up, but the Republicans could win control, keep control of the House of Representatives, keep control of the Senate. Of course, the Democrats could win both of those as well. This is a pretty close election, it seems. And so Trump has done a couple of things. Number one, he has worked with states to redistrict, Republican states to redistrict, so that Republicans would have advantages in more districts in their states. My state of Indiana, you've heard me talk about this in the past. I'm not going to go through it again today. My state refused to redistrict back at the beginning of the year. In fact, the folks who opposed redistricting in Indiana, most of them, many of them paid a price at the polls, and many of them were primaried here in 2026. And may this be notice, this is even a notice to my State Senator Rod Bray. 2028's coming, and we are not going to forget this. We are not going to forget this. Rod Bray was one of the main reasons that this did not happen in the Indiana State Senate. I told you that I'm a constituent. I just wanted to talk to him. I wasn't going to yell at him. I'm a very reasonable guy. I actually like, personally, Rod Bray. Ran for me, hid from me, wouldn't show up at his office when the chips were down. It was pretty pathetic, if you ask me. And so there's going to be continued political fallout from this in further elections further down the road, as well there should be. And now we're finding that there's more evidence. We've been told by the left, we've been told by the media that non-citizens voting is virtually unheard of. This is like finding a rare gem buried in your backyard. This is just totally out of the ordinary. It never happens. But now we're finding through investigations and the turning over of state voter rolls to the federal government, this happens more frequently than they want you to believe. So the article here says Trump DOJ has secured about 24 non-citizen voting arrests, prosecutions, or convictions in the last few months, with about another 90 more cases under investigation. A small-town Kansas mayor born in Mexico, the article writes. A Filipino senior citizen living in Hawaii. To Pakistani, thank you, Obama, for teaching me how to say that correctly, men residing in New Jersey, an Aussie in Louisiana, and a Chinese student studying at the University of Michigan. They all have one thing in common. Each has been charged in the last year with illegally voting in U.S. federal elections as foreigners, part of a sudden wave of prosecutions led by Trump's Department of Justice for a crime that used to be among the rarest in the federal court system. Now, let me just pause there for a moment. What is it that would make something the rarest type of crime that's actually in the United States? What would make it a rare crime? Well, what would make it a rare crime is that it isn't prosecuted very often. And why isn't something prosecuted very often? Well, there's several reasons for that. You could say, number one, that it doesn't happen very often. You could say it's not prosecuted because there's no evidence of it, because there are no instances of it. But that's not the only explanation for this. Maybe, just maybe, it's not something that's a priority for prosecutors. Maybe, just maybe, the people who are involved in prosecuting said crimes have a difficult time providing the evidence. You know, it's often said, or it has been said, that voting illegally in an election is a victimless crime. It's something that is, you know, there's not a direct victim. We're all victimized by it in this country. Your vote is actually diluted by this. Your vote is actually canceled out in this when this happens. But it's not like someone broke into your home and stole one of your possessions. It's not like you've been personally injured in a crime. and you're seeking to be to have that rectified, justified, or that for the individual to face justice and so forth. So there's lots of reasons why these may not be these elections. These charges are rare. It's certainly possible that they don't happen, but we see examples of these happening, and we have the names and the receipts to back this up. That's what this article is doing. The Trump Justice Department has secured about 24 non-citizen voting arrests, prosecutions, or convictions in the last few months alone, with about another 90 more cases under investigation, officials told Just the News. So that's what? Just a little over 100 of these are under investigation, or there's convictions, or there are charges in these cases. So that's not a huge amount but that doesn't mean that that's all that there is. And that doesn't mean that there's not more evidence out there that we are going to find out more things about. So all 50 states were sent notices this month that election officials can and will be prosecuted too if they allow non-citizens to vote. Now, this is really where this begins to get more interesting. Now you have people who are running elections that have been notified that if you are allowing this to happen, right? Not just if it's happening and you can't catch it, but if you are actually allowing this to happen, if you're not stopping this, trying to prevent this from happening, you may be guilty of a crime as well. You could be prosecuted for this. Now we're beginning to get to potentially here the root cause of some of these larger reasons, the bigger reasons that some of these things may not be charged as frequently as they should be. So it isn't just bad policy. This is a quote from the article. Actually, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Harmeet Dillon, this is what she said. It isn't just bad policy to let non-citizens vote in elections. It's a crime. And this Department of Justice will intend to prosecute that crime if these election officials having been informed that there are non-citizens on the voter rolls, knowingly allow those people to vote, enable their enrollment on the voter rolls, are passive in the face of this knowledge, etc. This is not some idle threat. So basically, if you know that there are people who are on the voter rolls that are being allowed to vote, if you enable their enrollment on said voter rolls, if you're passive and don't do anything about it, Harmeet Dillon says this is not an idle threat. You may be prosecuted. So remember, we have people that have been given the task of making sure that our elections are safe and secure, making sure that people who are only on the voter rolls are allowed to vote. And if they've not been doing their jobs, by refusing to put safeguards into place to make sure that people who have, if they know these things are happening and do nothing about it, they become no longer just idle people who are standing by. These are people who are part of the problem. So DOJ officials have found 3 major problems in policing states' voter rolls ahead of the 2026 election. Hundreds of thousands of dead people are still eligible to vote. That's a big problem. Tens of thousands illegal aliens are on the rolls, and scores of foreigners having gone beyond registering to, in fact, vote in a federal election, which is illegal. I would maintain, why are they even registering to vote? How many of these things have to happen? How many times do we have to say that it was a mistake and oversight? How many of these things happen before we say, look, there's a problem here. We have to do something about this. And so this is a big deal. I mean, even the number of dead people on the ballots is a major, major problem, especially when they are, in some cases, having ballots potentially cast in their name. You can see the problem here. Again, when there is someone who is registered to vote and that person is not eligible to vote, you can see that it creates a pathway for someone else to cast a ballot, especially if we're dealing with states that don't have photo ID at the polls. It does not require some great imagination to see how this happens. This is certainly something that needs to be cleaned up. Dillon, the top election cop inside the DOJ, believes the numbers of foreigners illicitly voting in elections is probably higher, but has been frustrated that U.S. attorney offices across the country haven't made illegal voting a larger priority until just recently. There you go. This is a big problem here. This is part of the problem. I don't know how big of a problem this is, but I do know that this is part of the problem. You have attorneys that just aren't, prosecutors that aren't making this a priority until now. That's changing with the sudden explosion of cases, the article says here. Just before the 250th American birthday celebration, 3 non-United States citizens in Florida confessed to having knowingly voted in federal elections despite not being able to do so. But the problem is, if they weren't able to do so, how did they do it? And why is there no curiosity from people on the left side of the aisle, the Democrat Party? Why is this not a factor, a concern to them? Oh, Todd, it's because there's not many. How do we know there aren't many? You don't even want to have the conversation. Well, Todd, we looked into this. We looked into this in 2020. This is simply, these talking points are simply not correct. And they're not even all directly related to one another. Nonetheless, it does expose a larger problem and a concern that many Americans have, and that is the integrity of our elections, the security of our elections. If you are not a U.S. citizen, you should not be voting in our elections. If you're ineligible to vote, you should not be allowed to vote. It should be impossible, as close to impossible as possible, for you to not be able to vote. That's how this should work. We should have safeguards in place that understand that there are people. Why would they not? Why would people why would people break every other law on the books, but not this one, right? Why would someone cross, for example, illegally into this country, willingly step across that border, right? That threshold, the threshold between the United States and Mexico, for example, but refuse to step across the threshold in the voting booth, especially when they're quite aware that nothing is ever done about this. That's another way of looking at this. Maybe, just maybe, there aren't many prosecutions because this is not a priority for U.S. attorneys, or hasn't been for prosecutors over the course of time. And the people doing it well know that. Again, there's no victim. There's no immediate harm. It's like a nameless, faceless crime that we all know is happening, but we refuse to look into it for reasons that I suspect would make the average person's skin crawl, especially when one side seems to have no interest in stopping this whatsoever. No one is trying to make it harder for people who are supposed to vote to be able to vote. Right? That is not the case. That's the argument. Republicans are trying to disenfranchise voters. They're trying to silence them at the polls. That's not the case. That is not the case. What's being done here is a balance in how elections should be run. They should be as accessible as possible to people who can legally vote in them, while doing everything we can to make them as inaccessible as possible to the people who are not supposed to be voting. And then that is the way that this should work. Unfortunately, it hasn't been. But we're told that this, of course, doesn't happen. We're told that these things are basically just made up by Republicans for reasons of why. Why? Again, I guess the argument is so that Republicans can stop people from trying to vote legally. That's simply not the case. It is not the case. It's not what I want. Listen, I've shared the story on here before. I had a personal assistant. I really like this young lady. She's now, she's no longer working here with us. Her and her husband have moved, and she's got her own little business, and I'm very pleased with her. I'm proud of her. I think she's great. She voted for the first time in, I guess it would have been 2020. And we talked. She knew what I did, right? I mean, it's no secret. I mean, we knew each other well. And she decided that she was going to vote in 2020. She requested a mail-in ballot, and she got the ballot, and she didn't really know how to do it. She'd never voted before. She was originally born, or she grew up in South Dakota. She moved to Indiana. And she said, "Can you help me, like, make sure I fill this out right?" I said, "Sure." So she had her ballot, and she was asking me, how to do this and that, and I was explaining it to her. And she ended up, I didn't ask. She knew who I was voting for. I didn't make that a secret. She later told me she voted for Biden, and I helped her cast her ballot. I didn't vote or fill in the circle, but she had questions about, just to make sense of it, what she was voting for. She just hadn't done it before. Totally reasonable sorts of questions, and I answered her questions. She later told me she considered voting for Trump, but she voted for Biden. I wasn't trying to prevent her from voting. In fact, I absolutely love that she did vote. I think she made a wild choice, but still respect her. I think the world of this young lady. That's how I view the voting polls. Now, you might say, well, that's not the way most Republicans do. Maybe. I don't think that's the case. I think most of us do look at it this way. I can only speak for myself. I'm not here to try to disenfranchise anybody from voting. I'm trying to make sure, and I'm on the side of this, that's trying to make sure that every legal ballot is counted and every illegal ballot is not counted. In fact, every illegal ballot is prevented from being cast altogether. So we'll continue discussing this. I got to take a break. Looked at the clock here. It's time to wrap this segment up. Friends, if you're dealing with discomfort, if you're tired of living off of prescriptions, living with the side effects, managing those, you are not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run company, family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. There's no hype, synthetics, or funny business. This is just the real deal done right. The garbage, the horror stories that you hear about kratom are from shady sellers that are actually selling synthetic junk. That's not what you get at Christopher's. You can start with their kratom starter pack. Coupon code Todd Huff will save you 10%. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Want to switch gears? Not switch gears. I want to move on to talk about the Save America Act, specifically to combat some of these problems. So if you don't know, you need to be reminded there's a lot of things to keep on top of out there in today's headlines, but one of the things to keep on top of is something called the Save America Act. A version of this has passed the U.S. House of Representatives. The Senate has been kicking and screaming. Of course, there are realities. The Republicans only control 53 seats in the U.S. Senate. There's the filibuster rule that basically says anything without 60 votes really can't get through the Senate. Democrats are going to stand united. Largely, there might be, I don't know, would Fetterman vote for this? I haven't followed him on this, but there might be someone like Fetterman who might vote for this. I haven't seen that. I'm just saying that they'll stand unified with maybe an exception along the way. So this Save America Act, all it does, again, I've gone through this before, all it does is basically three things. First, it requires that when you register to vote that you have to prove with documents that you are an American citizen. So you have to bring the receipts, as they say. You have to show and prove and demonstrate that you are, in fact, an American citizen. I just went through what's the stupid thing called? It's not the Smart ID. It's the one that gives you the star on your license. I've shared on here I had some difficulty getting that. It's the same sort of thing. You have to prove, I don't know, with your birth certificate and some other social security card, things like that, that you are a U.S. citizen. Now, a lot of these things in my state, we've already had to do. Like if you're a woman and you get married and you change your last name, you have to update your identification. You have to then be able to demonstrate that, connect the dots between my new name to my maiden name, and then my maiden name, if you're a woman, a married woman, has to be able to match those documents showing, like on your birth certificate or whatever, that you are a U.S. citizen. These are things that are common sense that people do already, at least in large swaths of this country. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a couple of versions of this bill. One didn't have the voter ID requirement to show that at the polls. The other does. The best example, or the best version of this does. But a photo ID when you vote. There are states that do not require photo ID for in-person voting, which is absolutely ridiculous. And the things that they tell us about the reasons that people should not be required to provide a voter picture ID at the polls is absolutely stupid. It's stupid. It's not racist. It's not a type of voter disenfranchisement. It's not a poll tax. In fact, if you don't have an ID, which the vast majority of Americans will have a photo ID, a driver's license, for example. If you do not have one, in my state, and I think a free one would be provided to you. You can get a free voter ID, right? You can get a free taxpayer-funded voter ID. That is not what this is about. This is not about forcing you to pay money to vote. This is about proving that you are an American citizen when you register, and proving that you're the person who registered when you show up at the polls. This is basic common sense. This is not some sort of nefarious operation to keep people from exercising their constitutional right to vote. That is absolute ridiculousness out there. So the third thing is that the Save America Act limits, restricts, prevents mass mail-in voting. It doesn't eliminate all mail-in voting. It eliminates mass mail-in voting. And there are people out there that don't understand this. And you know what? I'm very sympathetic. If you don't understand these things, the differences, the nuances, I will explain it. And I'll do that right now. But what I don't appreciate are when people don't understand it. They have very strong opinions that are based upon things that are not true, that are based upon an incorrect understanding of these things. I have a problem with that. I think that is the height of stupidity and arrogance to think that you understand something when you don't. So, the difference between mass mail-in voting and, say, absentee mail-in voting is quite simple. Mass mail-in voting is when you basically send everyone who's registered in your state to vote a ballot by mail. That you send that to everybody. Everybody gets that. If you have an absentee voting by mail, what you do is you request a ballot by mail. In fact, I see comments, stupid comments to some of the things that I post on social media when I talk about these very things. Idiotic comments. Todd, did you know President Trump, Melania, Barron, they even voted by mail? They're out there bad-mouthing it. No, they voted by absentee ballot. So the difference, what is the difference? It's not just splitting hairs. It's a mass, it's fundamentally different. So basically, if you move from mass mail-in ballots to absentee request-only mail-in ballots, what you've done is you said the standard operating procedure to vote in an election is to show up at the polls with your voter ID. That's the standard procedure. That's very logical, especially with early voting, right? In fact, I've heard other people who have commented that say, look, I would be in favor of even making Election Day a holiday if that's necessary. This isn't about preventing people from voting. It's about securing the process. It's about preventing some of the things that we've heard that we discussed at the top of this program. That's exactly what this is about. And so, when if you're not able to vote right? Then you can request an absentee ballot by mail. That's what you can do. I just told you that the young lady I helped vote here, that was my assistant, she requested an absentee ballot to vote by mail. She got one here in the state of Indiana. You can do that. There's certain requirements. You just can't say, I don't want to go in person. But if you can't get there, if you're going to be traveling, if you're sick, things like that, you can request an absentee mail-in ballot, 100%. So what is the difference? Well, the difference is in an absentee situation, you have someone who has explicitly requested it. So they said, look, I understand the standard way of voting is to go to the polls, but I can't do that. I'll be out of town. I'm not healthy enough to go out and vote. Whatever the case is, you request it, it's granted, you get that ballot, you fill it out, you send it back. The problem with mass mail-in ballots is what I just talked about off the top. The number of people, for example, the number of dead people on the voter rolls that are out there, the number of people who are dead, who are getting ballots mailed to their house. If you are a registered voter, you have to get a mail-in ballot if there's mass mail-in voting in your state. There's some states that do this. And so they send these ballots out to everyone, people who are on the registration rolls, and people will be getting these ballots, and we don't even know who's getting some of these things. Again, if we're sending them to people who are dead, what does that actually tell you? It tells you that the system is flawed. There's ballots out there that are tied to an individual who's not even supposed to be voting because they're not even with us on planet Earth, my friends. And so this is not a very logical way. Well, Todd, it makes it easier. It might make it easier, but again, as I told you, there is early voting in the vast majority of states. You don't have just election day anymore, number one. So there's multiple opportunities to get to the polls to vote. Number two, if you can't get out to vote, you can still request an absentee ballot. That's what this legislation does. That's all that this thing does. And the left is just upset about this because, well, it leaves it up to our imagination to fill in the gaps. And it seems to me when once you explain this, they seem very intent on making it easier for people who should not be voting in elections to vote. That's what it seems like to me, because there's no reason to be against this. Now, I'm going to play some of the things Senator Slotkin, she's out there saying that this is disenfranchises women and all this sort of stuff. I'll talk about that on the other side of the break. But, of course, I look here and it's time for me to take a quick timeout. Friends, let's be honest. When your financial world starts getting a little bit more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines the brightest. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics. From private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning, Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's about having a dedicated team to guide you each and every step of the way so that you can focus on what matters most: your family, your goals, your future. If you want real confidence in your financial life, visit fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Friends, if you're listening on Facebook, we're still doing some tests here. I'm going to discontinue this live feed. We'll pick up a new stream on the other side of the break. If you're listening on the radio or podcast, sit tight, my friends. We're taking a quick timeout, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking about elections, talking about voter integrity, talking about the Save America Act, which Trump is continuing to push for in spite of being shot down in the U.S. Senate multiple times. This is really the last hurrah here to get this thing passed. In fact, some would already argue it's too late to implement these changes and all this sort of stuff anyway. But the reality is that this has to be the law of the land. We have to tighten these things up. And candidly, I don't know after Trump's in office if there will be anybody. In fact, I doubt it. I doubt that there will be anyone who pushes quite as strongly for the Save America Act or some version of this to be passed in the U.S., in our system of government. So It needs to be done now. I appreciate his tenacity with this. So 2 things I want to get to here in the last segment. I'm going to have to mention this briefly. Just because of the sake of time. But tomorrow, Thursday night, Trump is going to be speaking, doing a national televised event. This is at newsmax.com. President Trump is expected to announce Thursday night in a speech to the nation that newly declassified intelligence reports reveal a foreign nation's plans to interfere in the 2020 presidential election. CNBC reported Monday, that would have been yesterday, citing an MS Now report based on 2 unnamed White House officials. CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Acting Director of National Intelligence Bill Pulte, FBI Director Kash Patel, and Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin will join Trump, according to the network. Trump did announce on Monday that he will be making a speech to the nation on Thursday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, but did not provide any details on the subject. Now, this is, of course, not, it's just another facet of election integrity and, of course, what's going to be happening, and another potential vulnerability to our elections. But the bottom line here is that all of this is designed to put all of the focus on this, to say, let's pass legislation designed to limit the sorts of things that we've been talking about on this program. So that's reportedly what's coming Thursday night in Trump's speech to the nation. Now, I just want to mention that now, but I want to share with you something else that's being said by Democrats that's simply untrue. Breitbart.com, several Republican lawmakers, including Senator Rand Paul, have rebuked Senator Alyssa Slotkin for saying that the Save America Act would hurt women voters. Speaking at a town hall, Slotkin said the SAVE Act was designed to, quote, rig our democracy so that it would be hard for any Democrat in any state to win any election. Now, pause for a moment. I've told you what this was. The SAVE Act, again, there's 2 versions of this, the SAVE Act, the Save America Act. What part of that sounds to you like it's designed to rig elections to prevent any Democrat from winning an election? Unless you're talking about getting votes from people who aren't allowed to vote, then it doesn't do any of that, which makes me pause and ponder what they're really saying here. Are they admitting? Is she admitting that this is part of their election strategy? Is she just trying to misrepresent what is in the legislation? I leave it up to you to figure that out. But she also said, according to the article here at Breitbart, that it would, quote, disenfranchise all married women, adding that they would have to show their birth certificates at the polls if they have a married name. So first of all, that doesn't affect all married women, number one. Number two, even if it does, this is part of the process of proving who you are to vote. If you change your name, I remember my wife doing this when we got married 20 years ago. She had to update her license and so forth. And she had to go, I forget the whole process, but she had to show documentation and all that. As well, you should. I mean, this is not some complicated or nefarious action that's being taken here. This is something that makes complete sense. You should have to, if you're changing your name, you should be able to document that you're the same person and your name just changed legally. That should have to happen. She wants you to think that this is somehow keeping women from the polls. Senator Mike Lee from Utah said, by that same logic, no married woman in America could fill out an I-9 form. By the way, an I-9 is a form that you have to fill out, and somehow that form's supposed to basically say you're not a terrorist. But anyway, you fill this form out whenever you're employed somewhere, And you have to do, again, the same thing. He said every American has to do this when they're starting a new job. That's correct, by the way, as someone who's employed people. That is absolutely true. You have to have an I-9 for an employee. And it's the same requirements. He says this is absurd, Mike Lee does, as it highlights why we need to pass the Save America Act. He's right, my friends. We need to pass this act. I hope that we do. We're down to the final hour of this. It's got to be passed. I don't know that it will be. The Senate has to put on its big boy and big girl pants. Republicans there have to do what's necessary, require the standing filibuster and all that. But this would not happen without Trump. It may not happen anyway, but I do hope that it does. Out of time here for the day, though, my friends. Thank you so much for listening. SDG.